I gave my lunch and my 700 cashmere scarf to a homeless man just an hour before the most important dinner of my life. I had no idea that the same man would be sitting at the head of the table when I arrived. My name is Grace Monroe. For the past 2 years, I had been engaged to Nathaniel Whitmore, a man whose family belonged to a world I had never known. The Whitmores were unbelievably wealthy, and Nathaniel's father, Franklin Whitmore, was one of the richest and most mysterious men in the country. He had disappeared from public life almost 10 years earlier after cutting his eldest son out of the family for marrying a woman he considered beneath their social standing. Ever since Nathaniel and I became serious, his father's opinion had been hanging over us. And now, finally, I was going to meet him. Nathaniel was more nervous about that dinner than I was. All week, he had been reminding me how important the evening was. He even gave me a list of rules. Don't talk too much about my job at the nonprofit. Don't mention that my parents lived a simple life. Wear the navy dress. Wear the cashmere scarf he had bought for me. And most importantly, don't be late. According to Nathaniel, his father believed being late wasn't just rude. He believed it revealed something deeply wrong with a person's character. So, on the afternoon of the dinner, I took the train toward Franklin's enormous estate. When I got off, I decided to walk the final mile. I thought the fresh air would help calm my nerves. The neighborhood looked completely different from anywhere I had ever lived. Massive houses stood behind tall gates, long driveways, and perfectly maintained gardens. I felt like I had stepped into another world. Then I noticed an old man sitting alone on a bench. He looked cold. His clothes were thin, and his face carried the exhaustion of someone who had been struggling for a very long time. I looked at my watch. I was already running behind. For a moment, I considered walking past him. After all, I had somewhere extremely important to be. But then I remembered something my grandmother used to tell me. She always said that you learn the most about someone's character by watching how they treat a person who has absolutely nothing to offer them. So I stopped. I sat down beside the old man and asked if he was okay. He told me he had missed the meal at the shelter that afternoon. I didn't have much with me. In fact, the only food I had was the sandwich I had packed for myself. I handed it to him. He hesitated before accepting it. Then I noticed how badly he was shaking from the cold. Without really thinking about it, I took off my expensive cashmere scarf and placed it around his shoulders. He looked at me. There was something unusual about his eyes. They were bright, clear blue, despite how tired he looked. He smiled and quietly said, "You're a very kind woman." I smiled back. Then I checked my watch. I was officially late. Very late. I stood up and hurried toward the Whitmore estate as fast as I could. When I reached the massive stone entrance, Nathaniel was waiting for me. He wasn't smiling. He was angry. 17 minutes, he said. Then his eyes moved to my neck. "Where's the scarf?" I explained what had happened. I told him I had given it to the man on the bench because he was freezing. Nathaniel stared at me as though I had just done something unbelievable. "You gave away the scarf my father was expecting you to wear?" I could see the frustration on his face. "This is my father, Grace. He notices everything." But for the first time that evening, I wasn't afraid. I knew why I had done it. I had chosen to help someone who needed warmth more than I needed an expensive scarf. If that decision made me fail Franklin Whitmore's approval, then so be it. Nathaniel said nothing as we entered the house. The butler led us through a huge marble hallway and into an enormous dining room. A long table stretched almost the entire length of the room. At the far end sat a single man. I stopped walking. My heart seemed to freeze. I recognized him immediately. It was the old man from the bench. My scarf was still wrapped around his shoulders. Nathaniel looked at him and suddenly went completely silent. His face changed when he realized who was sitting there. Franklin Whitmore, his father. The mysterious billionaire everyone had been talking about for years. Franklin didn't look at Nathaniel. His attention stayed on me. Then he smiled. It was the exact same warm smile he had given me on the bench. "Welcome, Grace," he said. "Please take a seat." I slowly walked toward the table. Nathaniel looked completely stunned. Franklin finally turned toward his son, but the warmth in his voice disappeared. His expression became serious. "For 10 years, he said, I've watched people carefully. I've watched executives, businessmen, heirs, and people who wanted something from this family. They always behaved perfectly, whenever they believed someone important was watching." He paused. "But today, you were told every second mattered, and yet this young woman stopped for someone she believed was completely insignificant. She gave him the only food she had. She gave him the warmth she was wearing. And she did it even though she knew she might be late." Franklin looked directly at Nathaniel. "You thought she failed your test tonight." Then he looked back at me. "She passed the only test that has ever mattered to me." The room became completely silent. Franklin pointed to the chair beside him. "Grace, sit here." It was the seat of honor. Nathaniel stood there, embarrassed and speechless. Franklin then told him he could remain at the table or walk away. For once, the decision was his. Dinner turned into something completely different from what I had expected. Franklin asked about my work. He asked about my parents. He wanted to know what kind of family I had grown up in and what values they had. "Taught me," I answered honestly. For the first time, I didn't feel like I had to pretend to be someone else. Nathaniel barely spoke. He simply listened. Before dessert was served, Franklin removed the scarf from his shoulders. He carefully folded it and handed it back to me. "It kept me warm," he said. "Thank you." I smiled. At the door, Franklin stopped Nathaniel. His words were calm but firm. "Never underestimate this woman again. Your place in this family is secure because of the kind of person she is, not because of what you have." Then he looked at his son. "Go home. Become the man she deserves." That night, Nathaniel finally broke down. He apologized for the way he had treated me before the dinner. But more than that, he admitted something I had needed to hear for a very long time. For 2 years, he had been trying to change me. He had been teaching me how to dress, what to say, what not to mention, and how to behave around his wealthy family. He had been trying to turn me into someone who would fit perfectly into his world. And he finally understood that I shouldn't have to become someone else to be accepted. It was the most honest conversation we had ever had. And instead of ending our relationship, it gave us a chance to start over. 3 months later, Nathaniel and I got married. There was no enormous ballroom, no country club, no extravagant ceremony. We celebrated in my parents' backyard. It was simple, warm, and exactly what I wanted. Franklin was there too. He wore a perfectly tailored suit, and around his shoulders was my old cashmere scarf, the same scarf I had once thought I was giving away forever. He wore it proudly. Not as a symbol of wealth, but as a reminder of the day a stranger had chosen kindness over appearances. The frightening billionaire everyone once whispered about was no longer just a powerful name. To me, he was simply my father-in-law. And as he watched Nathaniel and me exchange our vows, I could see the pride in his eyes. I had arrived at his estate believing I was about to be judged on my clothes, my manners, and whether I could arrive on time. I thought I had failed the test completely. But I eventually realized something. The test that mattered had never been about money. It had never been about status. It had never even been about being perfect. It was about what you do for another person when you believe nobody important is watching. And that day, without knowing who was sitting on that bench, I had made the choice I would never regret. I chose kindness, and somehow that simple choice changed everything.